farmers and ranchers from across the American West. Hear from the host, AJ Richards, and panelists Hayden Ballard, Shad Sullivan, Heather Maud, and Rich Brazel as they discuss the challenges, opportunities, and future of American agriculture.
All right, thank you. Hello, everybody. We are extremely blessed to be here. My name's AJ Richards. I come by way of Cody, Wyoming. So if you've ever heard of Yellowstone, we are at the east entrance of Yellowstone. But my family homesteaded the Arizona Strip, we call it, in 1916. So it's the north side of the Grand Canyon. And they have been ranching cattle in that area for 6 generations now. And it's just incredible to be here with these other producers around the country. But as many people recognize, during COVID, our supply chain and the fragility of the supply chain became very apparent. And so I started working on connecting with farmers and ranchers all across the country to discover what we could do together to change the tide of our American agriculture and how to connect the consumer back to the producers, the source of where our food comes from. We don't need to worry so much about labels if you have that direct access, because then you can ask the people who grew it themselves what that process was. So it is an honor for me today, as the city slicker cousin of 6 generations of ranchers, to be here with some incredible incredible ranchers.
There ain't a farmer on this
No,
stage,
there's not a
AJ.
farmer on this panel. These are all Western ranchers, and they have different unique perspectives on our food system and how we become a healthy nation again. So I'm gonna start down here with Hayden at the end. Hayden, if you want to take a second to introduce yourself here.
You betcha. Yeah, so Hayden Ballard. So I come from the same region as AJ originally. My family homesteaded in southern Utah, northern Arizona, dating back into the late to mid 1800s. And so I'm blessed enough to be the 6th generation of Ballard to raise cattle in southern Utah. We're on the same BLM allotment, the Bureau of Land Management. We're raising cattle on the same private and federal land dating back to 1917. And so that heritage is kind of what drove me to, A, I want to continue that legacy for my kids, but then B, I'm also an attorney and I specialize in a lot of these federal land issues because we need that longevity. We need to be able to continue that tradition of ranching in the Western United States. And we've got a litany of challenges that we're all facing, in addition to the rest of what y'all are facing in the rest of the country. And so, that's, I guess, a brief background on who I am, and I won't take up the whole time. Let some of these other folks introduce themselves too.
Yeah, before we move on, Hayden, I got a question for you. So, most folks here, if they've never been, west, they may not understand the dynamics of federal lands and how that interacts with their food system and how the beef they're consuming gets on their table. They also may not understand the connection between the wildfires that I'm sure they're hearing all over the news. Share with them kind of some of the dynamics there for ranchers in the West that graze cattle, the American public's food basis of their food system, how that all comes together, and what's caused the wildfires to be so high this year already.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the Western United States, the reason that we end up talking about federal land so much is because about 1/3 of our nation's land mass is managed by the federal government. So you've got a couple of different agencies that do that. You got the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, you have the U.S. Forest Service. And between the two, in the state of Utah, for example, about 67% of our land mass is controlled by the federal government. It's very similar in a lot of our neighboring states. And so if you take all of the private land that's available for agriculture, it's only about 18% of our land mass when you consider the federal land, the state land, the developed land, the urban areas. About 18% of our land mass is available for private agriculture. And so without access to the surrounding federal lands and without access and use of it, there would really not be agriculture in the West without access to it. And so, for generations, that's what's provided our rural communities with the stability, was access to our rangelands and our forests, both for grazing, for timber, for mining, all those multiple uses. that have sustained us for years. You know, for every animal unit out there on the range, it generates about $100 of economic activity in our rural communities. And so we've seen a lot of losses in our grazing over the last 60, 70 years or so. You know, I hate to throw a percentage on it, but we're way down from where we used to be. It's our rural communities are feeling that impact, but then we're also seeing the impact on the, you know, these wildfires like you bring up, because you've said it several times just since we've been here in DC, you know, log it, graze it, or the good Lord will burn it. And we're seeing that all over the West right now. These massive wildfires are a direct result of decades of policies that reduced grazing, reduced logging, and created an overload of fuel just waiting for the right circumstances. And when you have drought and an electric storm roll through, or they can be human caused, right? And all of a sudden you've got these mega fires that just go and torch the landscape, which then decimates it, and it takes years to recover both the trees, the rangeland, and then the communities. So that's why we wind up talking about that issue so much in the West.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. I appreciate that. And just to connect the dots for the consumers, if you eat beef, much of the nation's cattle that gets finished so that it's beef on your plate comes from what they call cow-calf operations in the West. So they have large areas of land that the mama cows can keep producing baby cows, but then they usually travel to the Midwest to get finished out so they can become beef on your plate, because the West doesn't grow a lot of forage to make a fat cow. So it's an essential component to us as a nation, our food system, that we have access for those public grounds to reduce wildfires, so we're safer, but also to produce the beef that we consume. So thanks.
Yeah, our herd's the lowest it's been since the 1950s nationwide.
Yeah.
And if you look at the losses in the western ranges, we've lost about 80,000 head of cattle just on our national forests alone.
Yeah.
And so absolutely, it's contributing to that very first step of the supply chain you're talking about. And if you're losing producers on that very first step, obviously you're going to have impacts down the rest of that supply chain for the rest of your producers.
Yeah, and then we become dependent on foreign nations to feed us, which nobody wants. So thanks, Hayden. Next we have Dr. Rich Brazil. He and his family come from California. If you want to introduce yourself quick, and then I've got a question for you, Dr. Brazil.
Yeah. So I'm a large animal veterinarian, ranch management consultant from Northern California. I've been practicing and working with my producers, mainly beef cattle producers, horses, sheep, goats, kind of everything, full spectrum, but a lot of beef cattle producers for the last 38 years. You know, my grandfather came to California in 1902, started cattle business in San Joaquin Valley, but I kind of took a little different tact, and I worked with producers trying to help them make a living, and really they are, you know, just kind of the heart of America, just great people, hardworking people, and for me it's a passion to help them survive and help them to make a living, so that's what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I know on like the Ranch Vision side that you have is bringing in the business economics behind the generational operation, because as time changes, so does the cattle business and how you make money, and that often doesn't get passed all the way into the rural communities on some of those changes. So
Right, yeah. I mean, there's a whole other component, and you know, technology's advancing. Cattle producers need to advance. I think there's 20 to 30,000 cattle producers each year going out of business. It's a very competitive industry, and they need to be able to make good decisions. So the software we make, which is called Ranch Vision, allows producers to see into the future in an interactive way to manage different scenarios to determine maximal profit for their operation. So trying to help them in that way.
yeah, that's great. You mentioned ranchers and technology. I think Shad still has a flip phone, so speechless.
No smart aleck comment from Shad.
That's awesome. Dr. Brazil, talk to us about what you see the stewardship of the producers in working with their livestock and how much care that they take, because often I think some of the messaging out there is just flat out false. And if you go to a farm, you go to a ranch, you know, you'll see the heart that the folks have in stewarding these animals for us. So talk about that from your perspective as a large animal vet working with them.
Yeah, you know, the predominance of operations are family-owned operations. The predominance of operations are small operations. I think average cattle numbers in the U.S. is like 40 head of cows for a cow-calf operation. And that's a common misconception, I think, that people think that producers don't really care for their animals. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nobody has a greater interest in the health and well-being of their livestock than the producer. This is what their livelihood completely depends upon, their families depend upon. Again, it's a very competitive industry, and there's 20 to 30,000 going out of business every year. So unless you take good care of your animals and do a good job, you're not going to survive. You're going to have to take up a job in the city or somewhere else. So the producers do an exceptional job caring for their animals. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and we got plenty of time, so I'm going to ask you another question. A lot of folks here may have heard of the New World screwworm. It's been an issue that's been advancing from the south north. As a veterinarian, what can you share with the folks here about what this administration is doing to combat the screwworm, what they've been doing to prepare, just to kind of help them understand that aspect?
Yeah, so this problem has been developing over a number of years. We used to have the New World screwworm in the United States. We spent more than a decade to eradicate it from the U.S., and then a concerted effort to drive it farther and farther south out of Mexico, through Central America, and then down south of Panama, beyond what's called the Darien Gap. And then we have a fly facility there, this is how we control this problem, to deal with that bottleneck to make sure it never gets north. But in like 2021, 2022, and it seemed related to the open border situation and the migration of people north, it broke through the Darien Gap for the first time in decades, and it had been traveling north. So when the administration took office in January 2025, and Secretary Rollins was put in charge of the USDA, already had been talking about it before that and took a lot of steps immediately to prepare for it entering into America. So, they started a new fly facility in Texas that's going to produce 300 million sterile male flies a week. That is just crucial to get rid of this problem. We do have the technology. It will be out of America, but it's going to be a process. It took a while before. It's not going to happen overnight. And I would suspect that there's going to be some small outbreaks this summer, but I'm really looking forward to 2027, and I think we'll completely drive it away and for it never to return. So,
awesome, thank you, appreciate that. For those that are just kind of walking by and hearing for the first time, we're up here with a panel of Western ranchers from across different states in the West, talking about our food system, talking about the challenges they've been going through over the last few decades and the changes that this administration is bringing, so that you guys can hear it, right from the horse's mouth, so to say. Next, we're going to go to Heather Maud. Heather and her family come from South Dakota. They have Maud, Hog, and Cattle. And so Heather's going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to go direct to consumer. Before we go there, Heather, if you'll introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your family and how you guys got there.
Okay, thank you, AJ. As you said, my name's Heather Maud. My great-great-grandfather chased out ahead of the homesteaders and ran large numbers of cattle and horses across the West. Finally had to settle in the 1930s as the West was becoming settled in northeastern Wyoming. And I'm the 5th generation of my family to pursue production agriculture. I met my husband on a blind date, and he just so happens to also be the 5th generation of his family to farm and ranch on the same place on the banks of the Cheyenne River in western South Dakota. That's where we live today. And we have a cow-calf operation, which AJ explained what that was. We feed some calves over the winter. We grow both irrigated and dry land hay and small grain crops, and have a farrow to finish hog operation. And then I don't feel young, but the average age of the American rancher is in the upper 60s, and I turned 40 this last year. So it is very challenging from a cash flow standpoint to make it work with livestock. So we have a direct-to-consumer meat business through which we market every hog we raise and a percentage of our cattle, which means that if you're in the western South Dakota area, I am one of the ranchers that you can work directly with to source your beef and pork to feed your family. And There are a lot of ways to do that. We offer it 2 ways. You could buy a quarter, half whole beef from us, or a half or whole hog. Or I am the president of the Black Hills Farmers Market Board of Directors, and I also sell a complete retail lineup at the Black Hills Farmers Market. I am missing that tomorrow to be here. I usually only miss one Saturday a summer, and that's the Saturday my kids show at the county fair. But I'm here in DC and we'll miss that tomorrow. But people can then go through, just like at the grocery store, and pick out your meat for the week and buy it directly from me. And at the same time, then you have access to me, the person who raised it, and you can ask me any questions that you want.
Awesome, thank you, Heather. Something I'd like for you to share so that consumers kind of understand the impact that this has on your family, both just the overall impact. I'm assuming being a rancher isn't a 9 to 5. You can't call out sick, and it's, I do know this, and there's no holidays. You've always got to be there. So the job of being a producing rancher in the first place is very time consuming. So now you take on a direct-to-consumer business. What does that look like, and what can consumers learn to better be good customers for you because you're adding that to the operation?
Well, that's a really good question. You are right. The farming and ranching, you are on call 24/7, 365 days a year. That's just how it works. From an economic standpoint, we work on a 1% to 2% gross net return on investment each year. So one mistake can break you in our industry. So you can't afford to be gone and make a mistake. In terms of adding the meat business, that's another kind of 24/7 job, because if you want to grow that, then you need to be accessible to your customers and you need to be willing to engage with them. One thing I absolutely love about consumers that buy direct is that you do have questions and you take the time to ask them. So a key component of that is that I then take the time to answer your questions. A key thing that you can do if you want to work directly with a rancher is bear in mind it is one of many things on our plate. When I last week I went home from the farmer's market. I get up at about 5:30. I leave at 6. I sell from 8 to 2. I went home. I grabbed my husband and seed and went to the field to help him finish planting a field. So that's just how our life works every single day. So the biggest thing I would say, and I want to give a shout out to all my Western South Dakota customers because they are the best. I hope everybody has a customer base like I do, but just be considerate like you would of any small business owner when you're shopping with us. And also bear in mind that we are the people raising it, and we would love to answer your questions and help you better understand the product you're feeding your family.
Awesome, thank you, Heather. Yeah, that's really just want to share, like, one of the things we've learned in the work we've been doing. We built a business, it's called From the Farm, to help bridge the gap between the consumer and the producer. So we've spent the last 6 years learning how do we connect with the consumer and what are those questions they have that's keeping them from finding the ranchers and farmers direct, like Heather and others that are doing this. What is the challenges for the consumer that they don't understand, and simplify that. And then also, because knowing the rancher's lifestyle, the time it takes to produce the food and then adding the marketing, the sales, the customer service, the logistics to get it to you, how can we as consumers make it easier for our producers? Heather mentioned she sells in shares, quarter, halves, and wholes, and then she does a full line of retail cuts. Understanding the dynamics of those farmers and ranchers, and if they have children at home that can help, they're older, then they can probably be more convenient and sell you smaller quantities. But if you're talking to a farmer and rancher that's just an older couple, that's a lot of work to break a whole beef down into smaller chunks. So it's easier for them to sell to you in a quarter, half, or whole, and then you just fill your deep freezer and you go to that as your grocery store every day. And so now we recognize that a lot of people live in apartments, you don't have space for deep freezers, and so a lot of producers are now selling bundles, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, so you can just roll through it. But again, like Heather said, that value of going right to the source, because when COVID happened, how many up here was worried about where their beef was coming from? If you knew your farmer and rancher during COVID and the store shelves were empty, you weren't stressed because you had a face and a name to the food you were eating. So, yeah, That's right. Okay, so next we're going to go to Shad. Shad's by way of Texas. If you'll introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Shad Sullivan. I'm an American cattle rancher. I have an operation in Texas and Southeast Colorado. Born and raised in Southeast Colorado, but been in Texas 33 years. So I'm the stalker segment of the beef industry. So you have the cow calf. Yeah, you have the stalker guy. I'm the guy that buys the calves and grows them to a certain weight or age, and then they go to wherever after me. I sell them. They go into the food supply chain. So pretty easy. My platform is property rights and the protection and recognition of freedom and liberty through property rights.
So Shad, you've become pretty well known for standing up for the independent farmers and ranchers. You've been with the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. You've been with the President of the United States, helping them understand the impacts that are weighing down our producers that are independent. In other words, they're not built around selling primarily into just the commodity market, or they rely on a balanced market here. One of your sayings that's rings true is, "Where there's beef, there's freedom." What do you mean by that? What's the feeling behind and the meaning behind that for you?
Well, first of all, we are here to celebrate America's 250th birthday.
That's right.
And what a fantastic opportunity we have to be here in front of the American people who may not understand the challenges agriculturalists face in different regions, right? So when I say where there is beef, there is freedom, that foundation comes from our constitutional right to private property. Our founding fathers were extremely divinely inspired to understand and create the Constitution that would allow us to enjoy independence through liberty and freedom. And the only thing that allows us to do that, or the foundation, the very base of that, is our ability to own private property. And that might mean 10 acres, that might mean 10,000 acres, that might mean your winter coat, that might mean a 22 rifle that you go hunting with, or a 30-30, or whatever it is that helps you put food on your table and pay the bills. So the recognition that beef, your supply chain, is founded in property rights. All of these issues are interwoven. So when I say where there is beef, there is freedom, that means that as long as there is beef on the land, we as ranchers, you as consumers, will have the opportunity to not only create and raise, but to consume by choice. Private property allows us individual choice, independent choice, and that is really the foundation of the Constitution and the very foundation of freedom and liberty in the United States. It's very important to understand that without our ability to own private property, whatever you may consider your private property, maybe it's your bicycle that you ride to work on, maybe it's your car, but to protect that asset is the very foundation of liberty and freedom, and we must understand that.
Can I get an amen? Amen. Awesome. Thank you, Shad.
You're welcome.
I've heard this from a friend. He said, the difference between food security and food sovereignty. Food security is just having something to put in your belly. It may be a life of MREs, which I've lived, and you don't want that. That's food security. You can put something in your stomach. It could be lab-grown meat. It could be fake meat. It might hurt you long-term, but right now you're secure. Food sovereignty is our right as people under God to choose what we want to eat for ourselves and our family. And so, amen, Shad. Thank you.
Yeah, we're very, many Americans don't understand that we're net importers of food now. And that's a national security issue. It's a sovereignty issue. And that's why we need more people on the land. We need more producers. Hayden talked about being at the herd size being the lowest in 75 years. That's only going lower because we're depending on foreign nations to feed our people, and that weakens a country. So we have to understand that to spread it out, delineate concentration, make more producers, get involved. Heather has done a great job of that in western South Dakota. And so that recognition is a step forward for not only you in food sovereignty, food safety, and national security, but for property rights and liberty and freedom.
Yeah, thank you, Shad. That's great. I guess in wrapping up here, if you'll each just take a quick minute and share what your experience has been, because these fights that you've been fighting are decades long. Most people, if you don't come from the West, you don't know that our ranchers have been fighting for decades and losing because of special interest groups that have the lobbying power to silence their true needs. This has been happening forever, and for the first time in a long time, in decades, we have an administration that when you see these cowboy hats, if you're in DC and you see cowboy hats coming through town, these are independent ranchers that aren't part of any corporations that are just trying to maintain, in most cases, their family heritage. And now, because of COVID, millions of Americans have recognized the fragility of our food system, and they're moving on to homesteads of their own and starting their own food production, and then starting to make that available for their community. That's what the future of our food system needs to be. Real quick numbers, we have 1.8 million farmers and ranchers left in America. 86% of those are considered small by the USDA. Small means $350,000 a year in gross revenue or less. So that means 86% of our farmers and ranchers all have off-farm jobs. And when Hayden talks about the beef supply chain, we have 86 million head of beef cattle left in our nation with 320 million people. You don't have to be in agriculture to do that simple math to see where we're at. So we need to support these policies that help our land, our public and federal land grazers rebuild the domestic herd. And if you look into some of the new information around rotational grazing or regenerative agriculture, there's a lot of evidence that will show you that livestock on the land are absolutely necessary for our ecology to thrive. Hayden, in closing, what's been some of the biggest things you've seen as a generational producer being persecuted under the thumb of the federal government that has changed specifically that you're seeing in real time on the land?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll start. My dad, I have nothing but respect for the man. He's fond of saying, that which we have been given, we must earn again for ourselves. And that applies not just to this conversation about generational ranching, that applies to our country as a whole. I mean, we're sitting here on the National Mall looking at some of the greatest symbols, the Washington Monument right there in front of us. You look at the heritage and the freedom and the liberty that was given to us 250 years ago. And that freedom and liberty, it doesn't come free. It's imperative on all of us to do what we can and to look inside of ourselves and think, what can I do to ensure that the things I have been given, I will then go and earn again for myself. And I think that's something that can resonate with anybody that's listening to this, But in terms of our Western ranching and thinking in terms of what can we do to ensure the longevity of this, not just for our culture and our heritage, but to ensure our food sovereignty, like you're talking about. I've been very, very pleased to see what's happened in the last year or so. You say that the cowboy hats wandering around DC are the independent farmers and ranchers. That rings true for the most part. And this administration is listening to us, listening and then acting. And it's been really neat to see, from out west looking 1,100 miles back east to see the wonderful things happening that are, essentially lifting that administrative burden, lifting that regulatory burden, and restoring, I would say, the opportunity for us to go and earn again for ourselves. I think the independent rancher, we don't want more handouts. Me personally, I don't want more free government money. I don't want more, support from government. What I want is a chance. Just give me a fair shake and let me go earn it again. And I think that would be fairly consistent across much of the West. And I guess what I've seen is this administration, especially out of the USDA, is doing just that. They're lifting regulatory burdens and giving us that chance. So,
thank you. Rich, what do you think? How's the accessibility have been to this administration and the work you've done and what you've been trying to do over the last decades?
Yeah, just personally speaking, I just think this accessibility, the access to the federal government is really unprecedented. I mean, for me, right? One day I got my arm in a cow, and the next day I'm eating dinner with the president in the Rose Garden, or meeting with the Secretary of Agriculture. That's not normal. And I think we've all had that kind of experience of just normal, everyday people, not, you know, the wealthy, not the uber celebrities, having access to our own government, a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I just really have been so impressed to see what's been happening the last year and a half.
Awesome, thank you. Heather, so Heather and her husband Charles, I'm going to give you a chance to speak on this and answer the same question. A couple of years ago, they came under attack by our government, and they were under threat of being jailed separately. I'm making it very high level just to keep it simple. And so share a little bit about that, if you don't mind, and what Secretary Brooke Rollins has done to help your family and the impact. And really also, I think people resonate with the emotional impact of what you had to go through. So if you wouldn't mind.
So on June 24th, 2 years ago, 2 days ago, my husband and I were indicted on criminal felony charges for theft of government property because there was a fence that was not on the actual boundary line, and the U.S. Forest Service brought the charges. Their own record showed the fence was in its existing location in 1950, and I told you I'm 40 years old, so you can do the math on whether or not I built it or my husband. We had almost the same number of acres on our side of the fence, and the agency chose to circumvent all agency protocols and go right to an unprecedented criminal felony indictment versus working through the means that they were supposed to. The previous administration never acknowledged us, never responded to the hundreds of letters written on our behalf, never reached out. Several of our own state elected officials chose to take that route as well. But we had the distinct pleasure of being Secretary Rollins' first press conference on the steps of the USDA building over there, where she announced the dismissal of those charges because they were unwarranted and unfounded. And a key part of this is that I have two children that just turned 9 and 11, so they were turning 7 and 9 when this all began. And my name's not on the deed of any of the land or on the permit. That was all in my husband's name, but this agency had no problem throwing me in jail for 10 years along with him. So for our family, the impact of this administration has been very personal in a positive manner. We believe this is how the government ought to work with and for the people. I would also like to say this reorganization of these agencies is long overdue and much needed. You cannot manage the West from Washington, D.C. any better than we could manage Washington, D.C. from the West. We have seen a lot has happened to get to this point, and it is so very encouraging to see a government recognize that it isn't working as originally intended and to begin taking the steps to put it back into a position where it will work for the people. Because what is good for the independent person in America is ultimately what is good for America. And that is no different in our industry versus whatever occupation any of you have. And so it has been literally life-altering, and we praise the Lord for the people he put in place in this administration and for the impact it's had on our family and the future of our family.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Heather. Some of the things that we've learned that made this administration so effective is the interagency collaboration. Most people don't know that almost every agency in the government has some sort of power or control over our ag system. And so when something is wrong and causing challenges for producers, if you don't have interagency collaboration, you'll go down one path and feel like you have momentum just to find out the other administration doesn't know anything about it, won't sign off on it, and you're still stuck. We've not seen that with this administration. I've heard that from other cabinet members that Secretary Rollins doesn't seem to let anybody go without knowing the issues that she's trying to help us with. as she's listening to what the independents are telling her, or just farmers and ranchers in general. So, Shad, same question with you, and then I think you're going to wrap us up with something special. What's it been like? Some people, if you were on social media during COVID and was listening to any farmers and ranchers that might have come up because you were worried about your food system, you probably saw this guy's face and don't recognize it. But this was one of the first ranchers that got public on social media and really got the folks' attention around what was happening to our food system. So coming from there then to now, what's been your experience?
Well, my experience was I didn't know what viral meant until I did that. In 2020, during COVID, our federal government sent emails out because of the slow supply chains, and their request was to help us create alternative markets and or depopulation of our herds because the supply chains had slowed. And so I did a little video just talking about the issues that is going to cause, while at the same time we were importing beef from countries like Namibia, and we just got done talking about our supply chain and food sovereignty, and that went viral, got the attention. And so my life was changed by social media. I'm not an influencer, I'm just an American cattle rancher, but it opened the communication line up between President Trump and myself. Now we have Brooke Rollins, a great pick for the Department of Agriculture. Deputy Secretary Vaden. Agriculture in America has yet to see its best days. Under this administration, we have the greatest opportunity perhaps in the history of this nation to really uplift independent farmers and ranchers and create this knowledge and education for our consumer, because there is no doubt that we have the safest, most affordable food supply in the world right here in the United States. And we need to uplift these people on the land and buy local, buy American. You can see these caps, USA beef, right? Demand USA beef, demand USA made products. And that goes for your local farmer, your what Heather does in her local food system. We have to return to local and regional food systems to break the corporations up, because you see that corporations hate liberty and freedom. They hate private property ownership. They want to control it all. And the more concentrated the power, the richer they get, the more they lobby, and the less freedom you have. So that's important to understand.
May I add to that, AJ?
Yeah, please.
We aren't going to get into policy, but back to what the consumer can do. One thing that I think you should be enraged at as a consumer is that you don't know where the beef on the grocery store shelves that you buy comes from. And I think you consumers should help us in demanding mandatory country of origin labeling. Not to remove anything from the shelf, but to give you a clear picture of where the product you're buying came from, so that should you choose, you can support American ranchers, including all of us on this stage, when you buy beef at the grocery store. So that is one thing I think the consumer could really benefit from and assist us with, is demand mandatory country of origin labeling so that you can have clear labeling on the product you buy and know where it originated.
Consumers deserve the freedom of choice.
You
right?
do.
Absolutely. It's
And
in your
knowledge.
hands.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just so you know, that it's called mandatory country of origin labeling, and that's what you need to tell your Congress people to do. It's not in the purview of the Secretary of Agriculture. Congress has to vote on that. So we need your help to pressure your state's Congress people to get behind mandatory country of origin labeling. In the meantime, look for product of USA. That's what has been done in the interim. Hopefully, if we can get Congress to get on board with this. So one thing I want to say too before I let Shad close us out. Raise your hand if you were skeptical when you first heard who was called for Secretary of Agriculture. I will definitely start.
I was ignorant.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because she had to earn it. We've had people show up, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, for decades, and we've seen how that's gone. So the strength and resolve of the independent farmers and ranchers of the nation has to be earned. And she's earned it. That's why we're here. We've all got better things to do than come to Washington when we've got cows to brand and be born and fed and all kinds of other things. But she's earned it because she's fighting for us. And now we need the American people to get behind it. So with that, Shad's going to treat y'all to some Western culture as we shut this down.
Yeah, so first of all, what a great opportunity it is for you guys to be here on the National Mall to experience what we experience in the West. And if we all come from the West, and if we came from the West, then we started in the East. And there's this part of our culture was coming from the East, settling the plains as we go west. And part of that culture, you probably had some ancestors that came out west in covered wagons. I know I did, all the way, and homestead, and they built their homes. We call them soddies, out of grass and mud, and they planted gardens, dug their wells. This is our culture, and this is a huge culture. 100 years ago, 98% of Americans were agriculturalists. Now we just have 2% that are agriculturalists producing food for the other 98%. So our traditions and our values are very closely held. And so part of that culture was driving cattle from the south to the north, the great cattle drives. And these cowboys would take months to drive cattle from South Texas to Montana. If you've ever seen Lonesome Dove, best show ever, right? Many of you are probably watching Yellowstone. It's not really the same, but it is part of our culture. Well, part of that culture was at night when they settled the herds, the cowboys would gather around the campfire and they'd, say cowboy poetry. And it's just part of what they did to waste the time. And so I write a little bit of cowboy poetry. But in the recognition of America 250, I think it's one of the most important. I'm so proud to be able to be a part of this in this year in my life. And so, I always, when I speak, I say there's two sets of people we have to consider. It's not us right here. It's those who came before and shed blood in the name of freedom all across the globe. And it's these little kids out here who are the heirs of liberty. We're here to steward that. And so part of that is, keeping your traditions and values alive. And so I wrote this poem, and this is dedicated to every person on this mall that values freedom and liberty and values who we are as a nation. It's not a Democrat or Republican. It's not a right and left. It's an American issue. And the blood that was shed in the name of freedom we have to honor. And so this poem is a true story that comes off the Mullendore Cross Bell Ranch in Oklahoma. And it's called Brody, Bill, and Sean. And it goes like this. My great-granddaddy hung the wagon wheel from the ceiling when he built his home. He hung it there to light up each and every meal and to serve as a sentinel of days long gone. Now that old wagon wheel had brought his family out from Franklin, Tennessee, and had rolled 1,000 miles to claim a stake on the vast West Texas prairie. And it has hung there since I was a tiny little boy. I've heard 1,000,000 stories told beneath it, stories of trying times and times of joy. Now for 50 years, 3 sets of spurs have hung from that old wheel. And I often think about them like each time I sit to eat a meal. You see, they belonged to cowboys who worked for Granddad when the war was coming on. Good cowboys you hate to lose. Their names was Brody, Bill, and Sean. And somehow Granny knew that they'd be called to serve for Uncle Sam, to go off to a faraway place and defend this sacred land. So she told them to hang their spurs from the wheel in the dining room. They'd be there when they got back, and that she hoped was soon. Now Brody's spurs were inlaid with silver in his name. Bill sported his brand, and Sean's were only plain. But as time flew by and years passed on, we never heard from them, until one by one they each showed up in a box marked U.S. government. Now those cowboys was our family. They never knew their own. So we buried them at Cottonwood Hill under a tree that still softly moans. And we knew we couldn't change what God had meant to do. But Granny promised those spurs would hang there till they walked back in the room, and they're still hanging. And sometimes I can hear their ring. It reminds me of the freedom those cowboys fought so hard to bring. So if you're wondering where your allegiance is, it should be right here. And if you're wondering what represents that, it's those flags over there. Go pick you up a flag, wave it proudly, be a proud American. And let me end with this. To the flag of this nation and the life you live free, to the red, white, and blue and the greatest of thee, to the nation whose call was liberty's plea, may you never forget the American dream, and never forget where there's beef, there is freedom. Thank you, guys.